Pratik Patel is one of the most respected minds in sports nutrition and human performance. He's worked everywhere from top Division I programs to serving as the director of performance nutrition and assistant strength and conditioning coach for the New York Giants. He's also led human performance at Nix Biosensors and now coaches elite athletes, founders, and executives on how to fuel, recover, and perform like professionals. In this episode, we break down what Pratik has learned at the highest levels of sport, from sleep and nutrition to hydration, supplements, and the hidden habits that separate elite performers from everyone else. Welcome, Pratik.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So working in the NFL, you dealt with brutal travel, night games, and high stress. What did you learn about sleep and recovery in that world that you now bring to real world clients?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's really having appreciation for what sleep can do for the body and why it's important, and framing it in a way that these very, very talented high-level athletes buy into. You know, a lot of them have been able to achieve success sometimes independent of how good their habits are, because they are genetically blessed or they're very good at what they do, and they've created their own strategic habits and framework. Sometimes it's prioritizing sleep, sometimes it isn't. But ultimately, the goal is trying to find that fine balance between combining health and performance. So it's not all about who's the fittest, who's the strongest, who's the fastest, but ultimately, like we were talking about before, who can consistently handle these demands and workloads over the course of an entire season, over the course of an entire career. And you have no specific answer of how long somebody's going to be able to play. But what it comes down to is if they're open-minded and value the big rock things that they should lay as a foundation to approach how they perform, to approach keeping their health at a level that is very adaptable, that can handle all the different stressors that get thrown their way, then it becomes something that really they never want to neglect. So it's not all about, I have to be in bed at this time, I have to wake up, because you have a lot of stressors. We've got Thursday night games, you've got, Sunday AM, afternoon, PM games, you have Monday night games. There's international travel now because the NFL is a global brand as well. So really being able to educate and empower these athletes to want to do any and everything they can to prioritize that sleep is really, really important, because it's automatic. Like, we're there early in the morning. My routine ultimately ended up being I'm in bed between 8 to 8:45 p.m. I'm up, in around 4 a.m. I'm heading to the facility because I transitioned from afternoon workouts to morning workouts because morning was just the best time to do it. So I had to get my workout in. I had to meet with everybody, talk through things, get everything set up before the players started showing up. And when they started showing up, we could tell, who was ready to kind of go through the standard motions of the daily schedule because they were well rested, and who wasn't. And the ones that weren't, it's easy for them to tell, like, look, I'm dragging. I'm not going to be able to be as pleasant to be around. I might not have my all, but I'm mentally going to have to power through this. So yeah, learning about how important it is and finding ways to assess how somebody thinks about sleep and what their habits are, and then slowly trying to find ways to improve their general thoughts and habits around it was something that, I was very, very much in charge of, and, wanted to take those reins, because doing that for myself, I saw a massive shift in how I was able to not only think, not only get through the day with high amounts of energy, but also my health and body composition saw massive improvements from that too.
So now that you're coaching founders, execs, athletes who are wired to go hard, what's your playbook now for getting an overachiever to take rest seriously without feeling like they're losing their edge?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with really figuring out who they are and what they're trying to accomplish. Everybody's very much in this hard charging, you have to grind to find success. And ultimately, there is some truth to that. You can't just set aside a finite amount of hours to say, oh, I only have 2 hours to work and I'm going to prioritize recovery and sleep. Because, if you look at this equation, growth equals stress plus recovery, like if you want to grow, you have to have some form of stress, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether you get a chance to push yourself to the limit. And as long as you are getting the appropriate amount of recovery to take advantage of that stimulus, like you will see improvements. It might not be a significant amount in a short amount of time. It might just be more consistent. So you don't look at everything through a cross-sectional lens. You want to take a step back and kind of just look at how progress has happened over the course of months, over the course of, years. To go along with that, I always love taking a lot of time to learn about somebody's habits. So a very, very long intake form to figure out what's going on from a subjective perspective. What do you think about sleep? How important is it to you? Because it might not even be that important to some people. Not everybody has dived into the physiology and the research on sleep and how it impacts almost every single system in the body. In my mind, there's nothing that you can do, inject that's going to replicate what sleep can do. Every every living being, animal, mammal, whatever you want to call it, sleeps for a reason, and we are included in that too. So getting an idea of how important it is to them, how they rank the quality of sleep they get and why, and just looking at their general habits. What time do you go to bed? What time do you wake up? Do you do any sleep tracking? What kind of mattress do you sleep on? What is your sleep environment like, from temperature to electronics to, EMF to light to noise to everything? Obviously there are things that flag where it's like, okay, let's try X, let's try Y, let's try Z. What is your general, once dinner is done until you go to bed, what are you doing? What do you have to get done? Are you interacting with family and friends? Are you engaged in work? Are there things that you must get done that are non-negotiables? Or are you kind of just freestyling it, doing whatever you feel is right in that moment, or what you want to do? Watch a movie, play with your kids, scroll on social media endlessly and get lost in the algorithms. And to me, that really is eye-opening, because then I can see, okay, I know what I need to spend more time with in terms of education. I know what specific tools or resources might provide assistance here, because ultimately the goal isn't to try to make every single night of sleep perfect, but to get to a place where somebody is empowered to want to get to bed and feels and recognizes the benefit of it.
It makes total sense. Let's talk about hunger hormones, and as they pertain to sleep and weight loss. In other words, rest versus willpower. How does leptin and ghrelin, our hunger and satiety hormones, how do they tie in with impulse control, diet breaks, and why is it that we oversnack when we're sleep deprived?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And sometimes, I'll have random posts about this online about, adults that stay awake later are more likely to gain weight because, the research shows that if you're awake, you're bored, the body's just recognizing that generally this is the time I go to sleep, but you're forcing me to stay awake. So it's just a mechanism in body that we've kind of evolved biologically to say, okay, I probably need additional energy, so let me just eat some additional food, to the tune of, I think the average is around like 200 calories. Wow. So sleep has...
It sounds conservative.
I know, right? It depends on what you're grabbing. What do you have access to, and how motivated are you to get something if you ran out? Because I think a lot of people are like, I'm going to go down the street and go to DQ or go to the grocery store and grab, a bag of chips, and the first thing that I see that looks good to me, which is very common for a lot of people to do. Or you're going to get into the kids' Halloween candy. We have this big old bowl in our pantry, and every time I walk by, I'm like, what's in there? I'm like, I don't need that. But sleep has such a massive impact on body composition. It's probably one of the things I wish I would have learned when I was in high school. Going through a body composition transformation for the first time. Been through 3 pretty extensive ones in my life.
You're so normal, Pratik.
I know. And people wouldn't know, like, yeah, I was a fat Indian kid, and then, I ballooned up in grad school, and then, working and coaching, putting everybody else's health and performance and wellness as a priority. Like, yeah, I ballooned up at the tail end of my career with the Giants, but I was also very strong too. So it was one of those, I'm heavy, but I'm strong. But sleep is massive for body composition, because ultimately, if we are in a good regulated, circadian rhythm, we wake up, we go to bed in around the same time, everything internally is working the way it needs to, from the cellular level to the organ level to the systems level. And whenever something happens that throws us off that, which is totally normal, that's just being a human. It's a stressor, but it doesn't mean it's a negative. It just means that the body has to adjust to something different And depending on what you end up doing, you're going to get a specific outcome. Now, when you are getting into that point of being sleep deprived, and everybody has a different definition of what sleep deprivation ends up looking like in terms of total number of hours, I'll say it starts accumulating when you're definitely getting less than 5 to 6 hours of sleep, regularly. If it's one night, oh, we had to catch a red eye, or oh, the kids were sick, or we had to wake up early to get something done, or I had to finish a presentation, it's not the biggest thing in the world. But there are a lot of people that are kind of going through a negative cycle where something starts and kicks it off, whether it's life stress, work stress, the stress of being a human, and they can never really get back on track. And the body, while having to adapt to something in the interim, isn't that bad. One night of poor sleep decreases muscle protein synthesis, exacerbates and utilizes way more muscle glycogen, your RER increases. You start shifting internally to want to burn more carbs at rest than fat, which is completely the opposite of what we'd want. So now you can tell that there is a shift in your hunger hormones because the body's just trying to figure out there's dysregulation going on internally, and I'm not getting food at the certain time that I'm used to, or I'm not getting rest at the certain time that the body's used to. So now it's trying to figure out how can you compensate and make up for what your normal habits had been previously when they were potentially quote unquote good. So that's when you start seeing the shift like earlier in the day where the body's already off to a bad start. And that's where you have certain strategies where it's light exposure, it's utilizing exercise, certain supplementation to kind of just, okay, we know that we're kind of off to a bad start, but it doesn't mean that we can't have success in this day. Let's just provide some sort of alleviation or benefit. And then your day goes on. And if you, again, continue to stay awake, cortisol is still elevated, it's suppressing melatonin from wanting to be secreted during the normal diurnal fluctuations that the body recognizes. So then it's in this stress state where it's like, okay, I'm still going to flood the body with glucose, and then insulin's going to go up, and then that's going to be more fat promoting or fat storage. And it's just this cycle that negatively compounds itself. And again, it's not just because of one night of sleep. It's when you compound multiple nights of poor sleep with, low movement, poor light environment, no exercise, nutrition can be up in the air. And, a lot of people are experiencing this, and sometimes they don't necessarily realize it because
Right.
it's a slow burn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You mentioned supplementation, so I kind of want to dip our toe in the water, and then we're going to get deeper in. So you literally did an episode titled, "Are Sleep Supplements Helping or Hurting Your Health?" And if you had to guess, what percentage of people taking melatonin or sleep gummies actually need them? And how many do you think are just being sold a story?
I would honestly say most don't need them. And a lot of it is just companies like to strike while the iron's hot. The gummies have been super popular. If you talk to, it's really anybody along the lifespan continuum, whether you're an elite athlete, whether you're a business owner, entrepreneur, executive, maybe even a college student, what would you prioritize if I can create a supplement for you? What would you want it to be? A lot would say like just brain cognition and energy, and another would say something for sleep. No one's really talking about, all the other stuff in the middle as much. And that's what these companies are doing. So obviously melatonin gets a lot of pub. Now, melatonin is phenomenal in terms of what it is. I mean, it's a hormone. It's naturally secreted in the body. It's a very, very, very powerful antioxidant. A lot of people don't know that. That and glutathione, you could say, are supremely important. And as I said before, cortisol and melatonin have an antagonistic relationship just in terms of when one's high, the other's low.
Right.
And cortisol is high when we wake up. It's what gets us up. It's very important. It gets a negative stigma, but yeah, we need cortisol in certain amounts to get us up in the morning. Now, obviously, everybody's got their preferences on what those ranges are in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly throughout the day, it shifts down and follows that pattern. So that's why sometimes people have the midday slump, blood glucose levels start fluctuating, or they didn't get very good sleep. So that's when they normally need their afternoon coffee pickup, where it's like, that's not actually helping you out. It could potentially be impacting sleep later on. And the melatonin's down here, and slowly it's, waiting until it gets that chance to start getting secreted in pulse, later on into the evening.
If we allow it to.
Yeah, if we allow it to. So if we're in front of blue light screens, we're stressing, we're trying to accomplish certain things, we're getting late night workouts in, like cortisol is going to stay elevated and melatonin is going to take a back seat. until the clearance happens and melatonin starts to take over. And that's what a lot of people, again, are experiencing this shift in their circadian health in terms of when these hormones are getting secreted in higher amounts. And people are having issues because cortisol is high and the clearance isn't there, and they're wanting to get melatonin, so they're exogenously taking it, depending on the supplement. I mean, they've done studies of these OTC supplements, and it might say like, hey, you're taking 1 milligram per dropper or per whatever gummy per capsule. And when you get it tested, I mean, the variance is significant. So you're getting 500% more than what's on the label, because quality control in some of these companies might not be very good. They don't have COAs. So you're not talking about like the Thorne, Zymogen, Designs of Health, Momentuses of the world. I mean, we're talking about these random companies that know like, oh, people know that they should take melatonin to fall asleep. When in reality, we just look at, okay, what behaviors are impacting your ability to sleep? What's going on internally? Do you have nutrient dysfunction? Because there are published papers that show like when you have low levels of certain nutrients, and mainly it goes through the full gamut of, vitamin A, D, K, magnesium, potassium, iron, calcium, everything, when you don't have the appropriate amounts from food and or you get them from supplementation, they are strongly linked to negative outcomes when it comes to sleep latency, total sleep duration, sleep quality. And I mean, that just starts with that you have light environment, you have the fact that people don't move, so they're not tired,
Yeah. I mean, it's basic. It's that basic. If you're not wearing yourself out, I mean, that's why we get kids out to, exercise and play so that they can get tired, so that they can rest better. I mean, it's not different for adults. Sticking to the supplementation, for someone who's listening to this, who's eyeing the supplement aisle, how do you decide when a sleep supplement is helpful or when it's a distraction from the basics?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to understanding where somebody is at from a health perspective. And, what I love doing and what I did with the Giants players and a lot of the athletes that I work with, along with clients, personnel, family members, I always recommend this is, learn about your own physiology to figure out what's going on underneath the hood before you start taking random supplements, before you start following generic diets, before you start following what's being promoted in social media, because ultimately the reason people are failing at finding improvements and moving the needle on their health is they're just not doing things that are specific to them. And I'm guilty of this. Like I told you before, finally got to the point where I was empowered to take control of my health, putting myself through the same process that I use with the players. And I was doing things that I specifically needed instead of I'm going to shotgun these random supplements because somebody said this was healthy. And I'm like, okay, well, let me take it or do this workout or follow this, eating strategy or methodology with little success. So for all of my clients, we obviously look at subjective information to find out what are some easy things that you can improve upon to get you there. What does our blood work show? And for most people, we see there are massive deficiencies in a lot of main area things. Obviously we can look at everything from a lipid perspective, from a glucose control perspective, hormones, metabolic function, kidney, liver, X, Y, and Z, but nutrients also become very, very important. Magnesium's got a lot of pub recently over the past couple of years where everybody wants to take it. And yeah, you can get an RBC mag done. And rarely ever do I see anybody in those really ideal ranges for what I consider good for health and performance. So yeah, you're not going to really get it from food. So supplementation is warranted. So that's the benefit of getting magnesium. It's not just a sleep supplement. It's an overall health supplement that if you take glycinate, which is, probably one of the best forms, especially when impacting the nervous system to get you to calm down and become a little bit more parasympathetic. That's one big one. Another one's glycine. Glycine's a non-essential amino acid that I'm a big fan of. Obviously, you do have some genetic SNPs in there that when people take it, they actually get a stimulatory effect instead of the calming effect, the cool down effect that most people you would hope get it. Theanine's another one. Theanine is an amino acid that helps with calming the brain. So the brain's always working. So neurotransmitters are firing. You have excitatory ones, you have inhibitory ones, and you want to find this nice balance between all the foods that you're eating and the supplements that you're taking to stimulate when you need to be stimulated, but also calm down when you need to. So people that are always in their head, that they're like, I can't turn it off. I can't turn it off. Yeah. Maybe you journal, you take notes, you read something boring. If that's not good enough, then okay, maybe supplementation needs to happen. We need to look at what are you doing from a nutrition perspective? Are you just way too glutamate forward and you need to have something that's way more inhibitory? So that's kind of like a baseline stack. And there are other things that can provide a huge amount of benefit. You've got new peptides coming out like the PeptiSleep, which there's great research on that too. The companies are using in formulations. I haven't tried it personally, but I've had colleagues and some clients that have, and they really, really like it. And there's a variety of other things, a lot of adaptogens, a lot of um, other individual amino acids. People like tart cherry, people like warm milk. Eating 2 kiwis before bed because kiwis are really high in serotonin, which I love. There's a graphic that I created. I didn't initially create it, but I adapted it from what I'd read. It starts with tryptophan, and then there's an arrow. It goes to 5-HTP. There's an arrow. It goes to serotonin, and then it goes to melatonin. And then you have all the micronutrients that are involved in its conversion along the way. So that's why when people say, oh, I ate a high amount of turkey or chicken or white meat, which is pretty high in tryptophan, like, oh, I got to go take a nap. It's like, well, if it's in the middle of the day and you got stuff going on, like eating a turkey sandwich isn't automatically going to make you fall asleep. It's just you have this conversion that goes from tryptophan to 5-HTP to serotonin. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that goes along the way, and that's why people like taking these supplements because it's, I can skip all these steps and I can start taking 5-HTP. It's like, we probably don't need to do that.
Yeah.
You
And you touched on something that you have been focusing on for years. I mean, since I've been following you 5 years-ish, blood work-based nutrition. And a term that I learned through you, Nutrigenomics. Kind of define what that is, and if a listener is on a limited budget, what should they, and they wanted to do blood work, what should they spend it on? Because these labs can get expensive. I also gained appreciation for, because I grew up out of the country and I could just go to a lab anywhere I wanted to go and have these labs done. Not the same in this country. And it was through you that I learned you actually can. You have to seek them out, but you actually can get lab work done where you're not just relying on your once yearly physical and your doctor to recommend X, Y, or Z across the board without really doing blood work-based nutrition work and, as I said, nutrigenomics. So if you would discuss or define that and kind of go over that a little.
Yeah, Nutrigenomics it's actually a specific company, and I've used them in the past. They're one really good one. What they do is they just analyze your genes. So it's not like a 23andMe. It's more, we're looking at specific health and performance-oriented outcomes so you can learn what your predispositions are. Now, everybody's DNA is very different. Even within a family group, like my sister and I, we have cultural predispositions, but we have different individual predispositions. She might be a better responder to exercise training. I might have a higher need for vitamin D. She might have a lower need for vitamin D just based on how our bodies are just completely individually different. But you start seeing some very similar common traits when it comes to different ethnic backgrounds and different cultures. And taking those tests and kind of overlaying it with my own general health status, the metrics that I'm tracking, but also blood work starts making a lot of sense, and it can help guide. And it's not going to, there have been studies that show okay, if you sequence your genes, does it mean weight loss? And you don't do this for weight loss. You do this to be more intentional about what might happen or what might not happen. How much harder do I have to work in certain areas in terms of, do I need to take methylated forms of vitamins? Am I at risk for having a higher amount of oxidative stress? Do I have lower action of anti-inflammatory markers like superoxide dismutase? Do I need a higher amount of zinc and vitamin D? And I'm talking about myself right now as I ramble off all this stuff. Do I have the marker for excessive muscle breakdown? Do I have a higher threshold for pain? Do I need additional recovery, based on the workouts that I do? Am I a fast caffeine metabolizer or am I a slow one? And it just goes down the list, and it becomes very, very eye-opening when you've been doing things a certain way and you kind of already know your body. That's generally going to be one of the best things, as no one can tell you about you better than you. But when you actually get the data to support it and you're looking through it, it's like, yeah, oh, I experienced that. Yeah, that's me to a T. Then it's like, oh, now I'm really learning about myself and what it is that I can and should do to continue to become healthy. These predispositions don't mean that you can't be successful. It just means you have to be a lot more intentional about what you do. So there are a variety of different companies that now provide D2C options for the average consumer. So Nutrigenomics is one. I've been using 3X4 Genetics for a while. Now there's a new one that I'm going to be using. It's called Fitness Genes. Now the good thing about these tests are they're one time only. So unlike blood work or a DEXA or, assessing your fitness levels or your strength levels, which you would want to do consistently over time at certain intervals, like you do these tests, it's a one-time test, which is great. So it's worth, spending a couple $100 there. In terms of blood work, so doing all the athlete blood work really was eye-opening for me because it allowed me to have more open-ended conversations and ask questions. Because you would have athletes that fitness-wise, they can handle the demands. Aesthetically, they look great, but internally, like they're always sore, they're always tired, they're, telling us about X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, we're just looking at things at face value. If we dive deeper and look under the surface, now it's starting to explain why somebody is experiencing X, Y, and Z. Because, as I said before, health and performance are very much correlated. The healthier you are, the longer you can sustain certain levels of stress and perform at a specific level. The obvious, the reverse isn't true. Like just because somebody's fit doesn't mean they're healthy, but if you're healthy, you are fit. And it was very eye-opening to me because the players loved it. Like I would get results back instantaneously. I could have conversations. I could individualize my supplement recommendations. I could individualize lifestyle choices or certain recovery recommendations. And then we track them along and see progress. And then it would just be another layer to get buy-in, because if you start eating a food or taking a supplement, 9 times out of 10, depending on what it is, you're not automatically going to feel a benefit. So it's a harder sell because a lot of this stuff, depending on who you are, there's damage that's been done at the mitochondrial level, the cellular level. You don't reverse that in 3 weeks. This can take 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And that's one big thing that a lot of people don't realize. And even the athletes too, because you have such a finite amount of time with them during the day, the season. They're not with us for the entire year. So it's like, I need to put them on the right path and have them be consistent.
And so when you say that some of those labs are like one-shot deals, that I would guess would be to determine genetic predispositions, genetic conditions, genetic deficiencies, or not genetic deficiencies, but genetic markers for specific deficiencies or tendencies. Mm-hmm. That would be a one-shot
Yes.
deal. But then once you're doing blood work to assess the deficiencies and how behaviors and nutritional changes and lifestyle changes have affected it, how often do you recommend those, or is it different for different markers?
It's different for different markers, and it's different for different people. Now, red blood cells turn over every 3 months, so you really wouldn't want to get anything within that time frame unless it was a specific marker that may have flagged. And you're like, okay, I need to see within a couple months, have we made any progress on that? And luckily, there are ways to do that without having to buy a full panel, where it's like, hey, I can get a $20 marker, and I can just go specifically to Quest. They'll take care of it. So the beauty of blood work in this country now is you have so many companies that definitely recognize the benefit of people being more empowered to do their own testing, because unfortunately, as you alluded to, if you just go to your doctor for your standard physical, they're only going to be able to provide what insurance is going to bill back. Because if you start adding on different labs, your doctor could be like, well, yeah, I can get this done, but insurance isn't going to cover it. They'll pay it up front, but then you're going to get the bill back. And they're going to upcharge you, markers that should only be 10 or 20 bucks, like 80 to 90 to $100 each. And ultimately, it adds up. And that's one of the biggest deficiencies in this country with healthcare is it's more reactive than proactive. Like the insurance companies aren't going to be like, yeah, we'll take care of, $500 worth of blood testing per year. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. No, they want to do the cheapest thing. Doctors are bound to do that. Their hands are cuffed. Because, they can't just be like, hey, I'll get you these labs for free. Don't worry, you're good. So these D2C companies, and look, you've got Function, you've got Superpower, you've got Mito Health, and there's a variety of others that are coming about. So over the past 2-3 years, they have made a big impact on the general public with saying, like, look, you don't have to in this country, unless you are in New York, New Jersey, or Rhode Island. You don't need a doctor's referral to get blood work done. And even those companies I mentioned now connect and work with blood labs in those states to be able to provide a consumer access to just going and buying, a function panel or a Mito Health panel. You do have to pay more on top of that than somebody like, I'm in the Kansas City area or somebody in California would have to pay, which that sucks. That shouldn't be the case, but that's the way to circumvent that. If you don't want to go to some functional medicine doctor in New York City who's going to charge you
Right.
$1,000, $2,000
Yeah.
for the same labs you can get for yourself for $500.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But I mean, it's about taking matters into your own hand. I mean, you can choose to know. I mean, knowledge is power, and for true change, you really have to get to the bottom of what the problem is before you can just throw everything at the wall and see what might make an improvement. And so, gosh, I have so many questions for you, but let's pivot to creatine. You've openly said that almost everyone should consider creatine. I know not all creatine is created equal or marketed equally. Creatine still has this bro stigma, and parents freak out when their teens want to take it. I remember when my teenager came to me wanting to take it, and what do you wish the public and maybe some doctors understood about creatine and long-term health and benefits?
yeah. So I self-admittedly, when I was playing sports in high school, I would I would take anything. Like if it was going to make me lean out and put on all this muscle mass, I was very naive. So my parents really didn't regulate me like that. They weren't too worried about that. But I remember I think it was Mrs. Tarbutton's Spanish 5 class. I'm in the back with, I didn't have a shaker bottle that everybody has now. Like I had an empty Gatorade bottle that I ripped the label off of. So I'm sitting there scooping my track creatine, which is like a combination of creatine, magnesium, and maybe some zinc. And I'm shaking it up. And this is before like afternoon weights or our afternoon practice. And everybody's looking at me like, what is this kid doing? Like, that's my first memory of, utilizing creatine. But creatine's naturally found in the body. Like the average 70 kilogram person, which, I mean, that's not very much in terms of size, is going to have a normal breakdown of about 2 to 2.5 grams of creatine. So you break down, you build up, you break down, you build up. So it's not something that's genetically engineered in the lab. And then people started taking it. Well, you're going to get it if you eat animal products, if you eat meat. There's a small amount. You're not going to get 5 grams by eating, an 8-ounce burger patty. You're going to have to eat a couple pounds of meat to be able to get 3 to 5 grams worth. So when people are like, oh, no, you just eat meat. It's like, no one wants to eat that much. And that's very expensive. That's way more expensive than a scoop of creatine. Right. So again, it's a naturally occurring, substance in the body. It's comprised of, 3 different amino acids. And it stores in the muscle, but it also stores in organs, stores in the brain, stores in the heart, stores in a variety of other organs, not in the same amount as muscle. And it's used when we're talking about physical activity and applications as an energy source. So creatine phosphate cleaves off the phosphate group to help recycle ADP to ATP. So when we're talking about really explosive movements, sprinters, lifting, where you need an insane amount of energy really quickly, creatine helps right there. So the more you can load in the muscle, the more it can have that bioenergetic activity, the more you can end up doing. So that's why it's come from the fitness world. But now we're starting to see its interplay from a more clinical perspective. It's not just muscle, it's bone. So it does play a role with bone health and formation. It's looking at cognitive function. As I mentioned before, creatine stores in the brain, and it is an energy source. So during times of sleep deprivation, during times of concussion, the body is definitely at risk of having an accelerated amount, a higher need and an accelerated need of utilizing energy. So I've put in plans in the concussion protocols that I've written. It's like, look, blood-brain barrier opens, stuff can flow through. We want to make sure that we're taking care of the brain, because one big thing that we see in people that are concussed is low energy, lack of focus, and creatine can just kind of help alleviate some of those symptoms and those issues. Cognition too, that kind of plays a role with everything that we're talking about from a brain perspective. And now we're talking more about inflammation. So it has an anti-inflammatory effect. It is something that can help stimulate mitochondria. It has a role in depression. Again, that's more so from, I think, the brain perspective too. So when I say it's for everybody, it just kind of depends on, yes, there are certain predispositions in certain groups that definitely need a lot more. Women, vegetarians, vegans, athletes that are training and really, really beating their bodies down. So contact sport athletes, football players, absolutely for sure. And then you talk about the average layperson. Well, the average person is metabolically unhealthy, heavily stressed, sleep deprived, has glucose control, another big thing that's been utilized, heart failure. So there's a variety of these clinical applications that we are now seeing outside of just the bro science that has already told us for decades, like, hey, creatine's good, take it. So now that's kind of catching up. And now it's becoming more mainstream. It's being marketed to a variety of different groups, which is good because it's a product that's cheap to get, especially high quality formulations, things that are tested from companies that are very reputable. I mentioned a few. Mm-hmm. So that's my stance on it.
And 5 milligrams is typically good for everybody?
It depends. It's 5 grams, but
grams.
What the conversion is, it's like 0.03 grams per kilogram body weight. So for smaller individuals, that could be anywhere from like 2.5 to 3 grams. And if you're a bigger person, you can start at 5 grams and then potentially add in more.
Interesting. Let's pivot to hydration. I know that you helped build hydration technology at NICS, which was fascinating. How does getting hydration right or wrong show up at night in terms of sleep quality, cramps, even during the day or during sport, night waking, HRV?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is probably one of the hardest things to come up with in terms of what's the ideal amount of fluid an individual needs per day. I think the other hardest thing in all of physiology is quantifying energy expenditure because it changes day to day.
And absorption.
And absorption too. But really what it comes down to is it's all about an interplay between how much is your body utilizing and how much are you losing. And now all of that's influenced by body size, how much you're sweating, how much you're eating, have you gone through any travel, food intake, how many times have you gone to the bathroom? And really, if people have good habits, and not backloading all of their fluid later in the day because it's 5 p.m. and they realize, oh, I probably just had, my 8 to 12 ounce coffee early in the morning, and then I jammed throughout my day, and now I'm feeling really, really thirsty. Because one of the telltale signs of you being dehydrated is if the body senses thirst, then obviously it's a mechanism to say, I need more water. In the same vein, if you went all day without eating and the body's like, hey, I need to eat something, hunger hormones are going crazy here, you probably need to eat something, again, depending on who you are. So there's a lot of interesting chatter online about, oh, just don't drink water because water dehydrates you, which is really, really funny. And everybody's talking about you need all these different electrolyte products and X, Y, and Z. And to a point, there is some need for that. But ultimately, it's all about everybody's individual situation. Like the first thing you can do is just quantify, like, I'm going to track how much fluid I take throughout the day from water, from non-water sources, and then figure out what does that number even look like. And there's some bigger outlets, NHANES and all that have tried to quantify it. It's hard to do it for everybody. But in general, we could say that the average person is definitely not drinking enough water. If you use some of these theoretical calculated recommendations of you probably need anywhere between half your body weight in ounces and then anything added on top of that to replenish what you've lost from sweat if you work out or if you go to the sauna or if you work in really hot humid conditions because you live down in Tampa or Miami where, here we're in the Midwest, it's getting cold, but down there it's still going to be warm for the remainder of the year. So first you just assess where you're at. Are you drinking enough? Do that equation. Hey, body weight divided by 2, which is body weight times 0.5, and see, is there a discrepancy there? Oh, do I work out? Well, you could probably drink anywhere from 8 to 16 ounces of fluid during a workout. And then the question is, do I need electrolytes? Well, the funny thing is, if you look at the average intake of the standard American, sodium's high, potassium's low, magnesium's low. So realistically, you probably don't need to be slamming additional electrolyte supplements, especially if you're not working out. But if you're a person who's on top of your stuff, or you're a heavy sweater like I am, you're going into a sauna, just one additional electrolyte packet in and around activity or training can be beneficial. Now, if you're an athlete, you're an endurance athlete, you're a team sport athlete, those needs are going to be very different too. But just speaking more to the average, adult American, we can simplify it as much as possible. Like 75% of the fluid you should be drinking should come from straight water or just very high water sources, whether it's coffee, decaf coffee, which, I've got green tea here, 10 ounces of green tea, and then the rest is filled up with water. So that should make up the bulk of it. And then things that you can layer in: milk, 100% juices, protein shakes, depending on who you are and what your needs are.
Mm-hmm. And then as they pertain, as hydration or dehydration pertains to sleep, do you address that with athletes or with your clients? Is that something that comes up? How do you discover, how do you come across that information?
Yeah, it all comes down to just, getting as much as I can data gathering stage, talking about sleep. Like, do you snore? Are you a mouth breather? Because that's going to exacerbate dehydration. Do you have multiple wake-ups through the night? If so, why did you wake up, or why are you waking up? Is it to go to the bathroom? Do you weigh yourself consistently in terms of, especially for the athlete perspective? The average person probably doesn't have to fixate on that as much, but we're talking about, are you replenishing fluids that you had sweat out from a practice, from a really intense training session, or a game, if they are monitoring that metric too? And yeah, if you are dehydrated, it is going to influence the nervous system because you have lower blood volume. The heart's going to have to work harder to pump. HRV goes down because the heart's beating faster and faster and faster. So the time frame between beats goes down. And it's a simple test. Like, people hey, I'm throwing my Oura, I'm going to measure my heart rate in the moment, or my Whoop. I'm dehydrated, whatever. I chug 10 ounces of fluid, 16 ounces of fluid, kind of let it go through the system. Oh, my HRV went up. My heart rate went back down. Well, yeah, there you go. It's
blood volume.
Yeah, blood volume. One big impact or indicator showing that fluid intake is very, very important for cardiovascular health and function. There's a recent paper that came out that showed its impact on stress and cortisol as well. And obviously people that were dehydrated had higher readings of stress and cortisol, which completely makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has all been fascinating, Pratik. I could go on for hours asking you questions. Where can people find out more about you? I know that I have learned so much from your LinkedIn posts and so forth, but and then just general social media content. But where can people find you, find out more about you, and what are you working on next?
Yeah, so right now, I do have my social media platforms still available, mainly on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. As we were talking about before, getting into this new journey of fatherhood, and it's been over 2 years, has definitely, for the better, taken my time away from spending more time on social media to obviously being a present father, but also building a lot of stuff in the background where my aim and goal is to have everything launched Q1 of 2026. If it goes mid Q1, then okay, that's fine. I'm not going to beat myself up too much for it. But I think for me, it's really sharing these high level health and performance topics that have been known in elite sport and that surround elite athletes, but making them accessible to the general public. So you don't have to be Saquon Barkley or Daniel Jones or Odell Beckham or Dexter Lawrence to get this level of care, and really empower people to learn how to take care of their health and go on their own journey. So you don't have to follow Brian Johnson's journey. You don't have to follow Peter Attia's journey or Huberman. The truth be told, the things that these guys are saying, I already know this stuff. I've been doing it for over a decade with elite level athletes. To me, sports and performance science with a little bit of bro science has always been decades in front of everybody else. Now everything else is just catching up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the huge things that I have always appreciated about you is knowledge is power, and the way that you deliver these nuggets of information through all of your expertise and all of your training, and how you have put these things to the test, and you've gotten results from them. So definitely, I recommend anybody listening to look for the stuff that Pratik has put out there, his posts, his articles, the podcasts he's been on. All of it is just so full of knowledge, things that you can actually put into practice yourself, where you're not having to, like you said, you don't have to emulate a Brian Johnson, a Peter Attia, Huberman. These are things that you can do, and you can take power over your own health, your own performance, and actually see results. We appreciate you so much, Pratik, for everything that you have brought to health and wellness, performance, as anywhere from, like I said, executives to elite athletes to everyday parents that are just trying to navigate through life and be healthy and stay healthy and ultimately sleep well as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. We wish you luck in your continued endeavors, not only in nutrition, but also in parenthood.
Thank you very much.
Information, inspiration, and opinions are my own and are not intended to be medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider before making any changes to your diet, exercise routine, medical treatment, or if you think you may have a sleep disorder. Conversations I have with subject matter experts are intended to continue our efforts to optimize your sleep for better health, more energy, and improved physical and cognitive performance.